Hello, how are you? Many people think that a blood pressure of 120/80 is ideal for everyone, including the elderly, and even believe that the lower the blood pressure, the healthier the person is. But that's not exactly the case. This number stopped being a reference after the age of 60, and today I'm going to tell you what's scientifically backed and the main mistakes that many people make. You're going to love this video, so stay until the end because you won't want to miss it. Before we start, I want to ask you if you have the habit of measuring your blood pressure, if you already see a cardiologist, and if they have determined an ideal blood pressure for you. I'm going to talk more about this individualization here in the video. So write to me if this is a topic that interests you. I'd love to see your comment. And if you like this topic, give the video a like. It's really important for me here on the channel. And if you know someone who would like to learn more about this blood pressure issue, go ahead and share the video. Let's expand our chain of kindness. That's what I want here with the channel. For a long time, medicine worked with this idea that there was a magic ideal blood pressure number, the famous 120/80, and that it would be valid for everyone. So this concept arose at a somewhat complicated time when aging was studied less. We understood little about vascular adaptation and treated the human body as if it would function the same way at 30, 40, 50, and 80 years old. So we know that this isn't the case. Nowadays, science understands more about this biological reality that changes throughout our lives. The human body doesn't age passively. It is constantly adapting. And as the years go by, it's natural for the arteries to become stiffer, for the heart to need to generate more force to maintain circulation, and for the automatic mechanisms that adjust blood pressure to become less responsive. So this means that the same blood pressure reading can have completely different meanings for different people. A blood pressure that is perfect for a young adult might be insufficient to ensure good cerebral circulation in a more frail elderly person. I'll explain what this concept of a frail elderly person means in a moment. Or it could be excessively low, increasing the risk of dizziness and falls for seniors. So medicine stopped talking about ideal blood pressure and started talking about safe blood pressure. This is a very current and very important concept. Safe blood pressure is the one that maintains good perfusion of the brain, ensures proper blood flow to the brain, protects the heart and kidneys, does not cause symptoms, and does not compromise the person's autonomy. That's why nowadays, more and more cardiologists and geriatricians, the doctors who care for the elderly, do not evaluate blood pressure in isolation. It needs to be interpreted together with symptoms, such as whether the person has dizziness, weakness, mental confusion, falls, and also with the person's health history, like if they've had a stroke, a heart attack, kidney disease, or if they live with diabetes. Also, the degree of frailty of the elderly person, the amount of muscle strength they have, their balance, their current level of independence, and their individual cardiovascular risk in relation to age, habits, and other comorbidities or associated diseases. So, in other words, what matters is not just chasing after a perfect ideal number, but rather protecting that real person, the individual, the human being who is right there in front of the doctor. So what changes in the body with aging is that over the years, the arteries can lose their elasticity, they can become stiffer and have less elastin and less collagen in the vessel walls. So you just have to make a comparison with a new hose, which is softer and more flexible. Now imagine that same hose after years of being exposed to the sun. The rubber will still work, but it won't expand in the same way. It ends up becoming stiffer and drier. So it's kind of an analogy for what happens in our bodies, because this can cause the systolic pressure, which is the higher number, to tend to rise, while the diastolic, which is the lower number, doesn't always follow, and the pulse pressure increases. I have a video here on the channel that talks more about which blood pressure number you should pay more attention to, whether it's the top or the bottom number, and it explains this concept of pulse pressure, in case you've never heard of it. So if you want to know more about this, I'll leave that video linked in the description so this video here doesn't get too long. Besides that, there's another interesting point for us to talk about, which is the baroreceptors, which are the sensors that help regulate our blood pressure. They can become less sensitive with age, and this increases blood pressure variability and the risk of dizziness when blood pressure is brought down. So it's not a failure, it's a physiological adaptation of aging. Now, I think it's worth us talking a bit about that concept I mentioned to you about what makes an elderly person frail or not, so we can start from there as well. I'll give you two examples of elderly people who are the same age but have completely different bodies. No one is the same as anyone else, thank God. So people vary. So there are, for example, elderly people who are healthier, more robust, who walk well, have preserved muscle strength, no history of falls, are autonomous, and usually tolerate blood pressure variations better. And on the other hand, there are elderly people who are more frail, those people who often feel dizzy, have already had some history of falls, have lost muscle mass, which can happen as we age, sarcopenia, which I talk about so much here on the channel for us to avoid. They may have a lower physiological reserve and sometimes take several medications that can affect all of this. So, applying the same blood pressure target to these two very different people can be a mistake. So that's not really care. It ends up being a very dangerous oversimplification. A slightly higher blood pressure, in some cases, can even be more beneficial. I know this idea might seem strange, but it makes perfect sense when we look at it from a physiological point of view, because as I explained to you, with aging, the arteries can become stiffer, the ability of the vessels to dilate decreases, and the brain starts to rely more on an adequate pressure gradient to receive blood continuously. So in many elderly people, especially those I mentioned to you who are more frail, a moderately higher systolic pressure, and pay attention to this word I'm using, it's moderately, is not necessarily a disease or a pathology. It can be an adaptation of their body. So it can act as a natural compensation to ensure good blood circulation reaching the brain, preventing that feeling of fogginess, brain fog, allowing for greater mental clarity, preventing confusion or even cognitive slowing, and providing more stability when standing up, reducing the risk of falls, dizziness, and even fractures, which can sometimes happen. So it's as if we had a pump that needed a bit more strength or pressure to carry water up to a higher floor in an older building. So the structure changes and the requirements also have to change. What medical consensus says nowadays is that for elderly people, blood pressure can be 120 at the maximum, 130, and in some cases, it can even reach up to 140. What always needs to be evaluated is whether this blood pressure remains consistently high over time, if the person is not being monitored, because that would be dangerous, and whether this blood pressure is not being interpreted within the individual's personal context. In that case, the risk can truly and progressively increase because we know that persistently high blood pressure over the years is associated with a higher risk of stroke, a higher risk of myocardial infarction, increased strain on the heart, which can lead to heart failure, and progressive damage to the kidneys, accelerating chronic kidney disease. So it's very important to make it absolutely clear to you that controlling blood pressure remains essential at any age. What has changed is the concept of what control means. Because today, according to scientific and medical consensus, controlling doesn't mean forcing the same number for everyone on the planet, lowering a person's blood pressure at any cost, and ignoring symptoms like dizziness, weakness, or falls, just to reach that specific number. Nowadays, for doctors, controlling means protecting the brain, the heart, and the kidneys, which are very important and delicate organs, without causing dizziness, falls, mental confusion, or loss of autonomy. This is very important for the elderly. In other words, it means respecting each person's degree of frailty and physiological reserve in the most individualized way possible. So the best blood pressure is not the lowest possible, but the one that is safest for each person. So maybe you're wondering, Patricia, does that mean blood pressure can go up to what level? What is the acceptable limit that can be considered okay? There isn't a magic number. There isn't a one-size-fits-all recipe. There isn't a single number for all elderly people. There are reference ranges that cardiologists use to guide when blood pressure can be considered safe and when it starts to represent a real risk. Usually what cardiologists say is that for elderly people over 60 years old, a blood pressure below 120 isn't necessarily that healthy. A value persistently above 140 can already be associated with a higher cardiovascular risk. And between these extremes, there is an intermediate zone that should always be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. I'm not saying here in this video that someone can have a blood pressure of 130, 140, and that's all fine. That's not it. What I said is that yes, if your blood pressure is 120 and you feel unwell, you should go to the doctor so they can evaluate you individually and check if in your specific case, that pressure isn't ideal, okay? This video here is purely informational. If you have any questions, talk to your cardiologist who is managing your care locally. The most important message I want to share here with this video is that as we get older, the targets may change. It's not just me saying this, these are guidelines from the European Society of Cardiology and the American College of Cardiology. What they determine nowadays is that the target can change for frail elderly people compared to healthy ones. So when someone is a healthy elderly person, usually the targets can be a bit stricter, the body will tolerate adjustments better, and the main focus is really long-term cardiovascular protection. And once again, when we're talking about frail elderly people, the priority is really to avoid falls, fainting, mental confusion, and loss of autonomy or independence for that person. So it's always important to remember that any video on the internet is talking about consensus, about what science says, but to assess your specific case, you need to see your cardiologist. Go to your doctor in your city regularly and keep up with your checkups. That's the most important thing for your health. Tell me what blood pressure readings you usually see if you check your blood pressure regularly with a device, or if you only measure it when you go to the pharmacy or the doctor. I'd love to see your comment. Remember to like the video, that's really important to me, and to share it with anyone who needs this information. Let's work together to spread this chain of kindness. That's what I want here with the channel. See you next time. Bye.